Welcome to the Tribe of Testimonies. Here you will find conversations with faithful Native American members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, sharing their stories and their love of the Savior. My name's Andrea Hales. I'm Navajo, and I'm glad that you've decided to come and join us today.
My guest today is Shiloh Nyce-Despain. She recently emailed me, and I responded, and then, well, I didn't respond like the day of, because sometimes I don't. Sometimes I do. Anyway, and then she didn't respond right away. And then we did. We got together. It happened, obviously. But I'm really happy that she could find this podcast. If there are any of you out there who have felt alone, Shiloh has felt alone. I mean, that's one of the things she told me when she first emailed, that she was like, I didn't know there were so many other people like me. And I really hope that that's what this podcast is doing, is bringing you people you can relate to, people who share a commonality. Let's all remember the identities that President Nelson wants us to remember, that we're a child of God, a child of the covenant, and a disciple of Jesus Christ. But it's also good to know there are other people with similar background stories. The ideal of the church is that we come together no matter what. Anyway, so Shiloh's story is so great, and I'm so happy to have her with me, and I hope that you enjoyed this time that we had together. Here, Shiloh. I am in my home today with my new friend Shiloh. Shiloh reached out to me recently and was surprised to find this podcast, and so I snagged her right away. Shiloh, would you please introduce yourself in your tribal way as much as possible? If it's in your language, great. If it's not, that's fine. Not everybody speaks their language, and some languages are dead.
That's true. Yauts, Exkolasasa, Mahgwees Kilasa Nugwa, Aklan Timotsahe. Colleen du Clarence Nyce, Mimimus du Kramayam, du Terry and Ferris Zog, Wee Athlans. I'm from the Haisla Nation on the northwest coast of Canada. Mahgwees is my First Nations name, or my Indigenous name, I should say. It means snag on the beach. I was named after my great-grandmother, who is part of the Seven Sisters mountain range, a national, or a provincial park, I should say, up in British Columbia. So just think, totem poles, longhouses, canoes, that's up. We're under the tail end of Alaska, probably closer to Alaska than we are to Vancouver. Right in the Douglas Channel, there's a small village there that we've had territorial rights there for a while. And so what I just said to you was, hi, how are you doing? Yauts is hi. And then I introduced my parents, and I said I'm from Snag Beach. It's Imotsa, which is interesting because my name means snag on the beach.
Yeah, I caught that.
Yeah. I actually didn't realize that. I didn't know a lot of things until I was a little older.
Yeah, I get that.
So I'm picking it up as I have become more, not just interested, but had the courage to ask my elders.
Yeah. So it sounds like you were named after where you're from. I
don't know if it was after where I was from. So I'm tall compared to everyone there. 5'11", definitely tall.
Yeah.
And Mahgwees, the former Mahgwees, was tall. So I inherited her name.
Oh.
That's
so cool.
Yeah, I inherited her name, and she's part of the Seven Sisters mountain range. She's one of the peaks, which is, I didn't know that either. I just thought I had a weird name my whole life. So I'm like, snag on the beach. That's like driftwood. Because I'm long and tall, and but no, it's such a huge honor and a legacy that I feel really grateful for that I have that name. Yeah. And so the village where I'm from, I didn't realize how magical my childhood was, but the village that I'm from is right on the coast. It's like when you go there, it's like taking a 50-year time warp back. There's only about 500 to 700 people that live there now. In our nation, I don't think there's any more than like, I want to say 2,000 or 3,000. I could be wrong. There could be more, but we once were a great nation, but then when, colonization happened, the people were wiped out to about like 500. And then we've slowly been building back up again. But it's such an isolated community that it took a long time for, European settlers and whoever else to come there and kind of invade the land.
Yeah.
But also because it's so isolated and it's cold, we're the people of the snow, right on the coast. And, our main food is fish and what we can find from the ocean and the forest. It's harsh conditions. Mm-hmm. And so thank goodness it's isolated like that. And a lot of the culture has been preserved.
That's awesome.
It's magical. I didn't realize. Yeah. I just grew up, playing in the ocean and the forest.
You didn't know differently.
No, it was beautiful. And now I'm in the city and I'm like, oh man, concrete jungle.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
That's very interesting and very, I love that, what you just described.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah. So would you share something that you love about your heritage as it relates to the gospel of Jesus Christ? It can be pretty much anything, a story, a celebration, a way of life, a ceremony.
Yeah, I couldn't decide on this question. So I'll try and hit up a couple different topics. The first time, because there was such a separation in our home, not, when I was 8, my parents separated, but because of that, there was a separation of beliefs and ideas. And so it was never the idea that there was an overlap of the spiritual and like God and Heavenly Father to my heritage as, in the Haisla Nation. Mm-hmm. And as an Indigenous person, I never really made that connection until I heard my Uncle Lloyd. We were at just a smaller family feast in my Uncle Tom and Aunt Mary's house. And I remember he got up and he gave a prayer. So first of all, I was like, oh, wow, we pray. That's great. And then he said, "Hey, mas ich." I thought what he said was, "Hey, mas ich." But I asked someone after, I'm like, what did you just say in your prayer? I'm really curious. And he said, "Oh, I just prayed to the big chief in heaven." And I was like, oh, there's Father in heaven. That's the same prayers I have at home. And I loved that. And so that was like the first real, like poignant realization for me that, there was truths in both sides. I mean, specifically in my heritage, being an Indigenous person. And, that just the idea, and you probably see this a lot too. I mean, all tribes, all nations have different physical ceremonies and rituals they do, which we do too. We have different physical things that we do that solidify our belief. Yeah. We take the sacrament. Yeah. And that's physical, and we put the bread in our mouth, and it's to symbolize and remember those things that are important to us. And we do the same thing in our heritage. And so, drum circles and, or I should say that, like, obviously for me, like good, better, best, we have the gospel of Christ, right? Like, but there's truths everywhere you go, and there's the Spirit everywhere you go. And I have definitely felt the Spirit when I'm in the center of a drum circle and being honored with a rattle, which has happened before. And I just cried. It was just, I felt the Spirit. It was beautiful. And we were coming together. And another time, it wasn't, I think ours has been lost, but there was a cold water cleanse that a man had led, and he had asked me if I wanted to do that. And I was like, I don't know. What does that mean? He's like, we're going to go in the river. And I was like, okay. And I had never done anything like this. And I kind of wondered, I'm like, oh, should I be doing this? Should I not? Because you wonder what's appropriate and what's not with already the culture and the belief system that I have. But I did. And I'm so glad I did, because there was truth in that. And we dipped ourselves in a glacier river 3 times, and we faced upstream and let go of whatever we had to think of something, whether it be forgiving someone or letting go of an addiction or something that we wanted to let go of in life. And we went fully immersed ourselves under the water 3 times, which is not too far from, baptism
Yeah.
and the cleansing of that.
Well, even in baptism, it's in the name of the Father and the Son and the Holy Ghost.
Mm-hmm.
So maybe that was where it came from.
Oh, I didn't even think about the 3 times. I'm not sure yes, there's so many things that I wonder. I'm like, oh my goodness, I hope there's someone that's scribing things up in heaven is going to tell us all the little connections after.
Totally. I agree.
Because I think that would be so cool to learn, like the old past Lamanite beliefs that have been passed down and thank goodness been preserved,
Yeah. That's so cool. I love that. So were you raised as a member of the church?
Yes. What do they say? First generation member, just like you. My mom is Hungarian and English, but like.
How did she end up finding your dad?
Right. So in Canada, Canada's what, like the 3rd largest country in the world. So we're used to driving a long ways all the time. But, back in the day, trains were the way to kind of commute long distances. So my dad didn't learn English. I'm just going to go all the way back because I think it'll make more sense this way. My dad was born and raised, and his story was crazy too. I've never met my biological grandfather.
Okay.
Love to meet him one day. I'm trying to find him. I think, anyways, that's another story. But my father was born and raised in Kitamaat village, where Haisla Nation, Zimotsa, Snag Beaches. And he didn't learn English until he was 12 or 13. He was actually raised, I don't know if he's going to appreciate that I'm saying this, but he was actually raised by his grandparents. He called them mom and dad, though.
Sure.
And those are my grandparents.
Sure.
Biologically, they're my great grandparents.
Sure.
So it made things confusing a little bit lineage wise, but they had nothing. It was like super poor. And it was a really terrible time. He remembers with the assimilation schools, because he was kind of on the verge of them, weaning themselves out. And his sisters and my grandmother went to an assimilation school. I have a picture of her at one. And it was just really sad because he said he remembers government officials and police or a religious leader walking down the street and just grabbing children.
Oh my gosh.
And this is his story, and it just broke my heart when he told me that my Auntie Lissy, who's now deceased, they had nothing, right? They were super poor. She had one doll. And they kind of knew anytime those people came down the street collecting children to hide.
Yeah.
And so they were told to hide, and him and Auntie Lissy were hiding. And he said that she had left her toy on the front lawn, or I could say dirt pad, whatever you want to call it. And she went to go get it, and they took her. And he didn't see her for, I think they came back every summer or every few years, but it was gone. She was gone at that point, and they weren't allowed to speak the language. They weren't allowed to practice any other culture. They weren't allowed any connections or contact with the family. So it was like they were kidnapped, right? Physically, sexually, emotionally abused. And it messed up a lot of people.
Oh, yeah.
And so, you wonder why there's this terrible, addiction and violent cyclical behavior that happens on reservations. And it really wasn't something that we've always had.
No.
It was given to us. And it was a terrible, terrible time of history that, I'm glad people are trying to reconcile and bring truth about right now. But anyway, so he saw her leave, and he never really had an education, though. And of course they wanted him to have one, but they didn't want that. Right.
Yeah.
And that's when I was told, this was actually from my mother that told me this story, because when they were still together, my mom was really trying to be a part of the culture. And then we lived on reserve for a bit until I was 2 years old. Anyway, she said that my grandma had had a dream that 2 men in black suits had come to the door and decided to give my father an education.
Yeah.
And then not even 2.5 weeks later, member missionaries knocked on the door in this small isolated village and asked them if they'd wanted to put my dad on the church placement program.
Wow.
Yes. Is this not crazy?
Yeah.
My father was also like, everyone in the family was given like a gift in the family. It was like inherited, like you're the carver, you're the political leader, you're the spiritual leader. And that was what he was given, was the spiritual leader as a young boy, because he'd always ask if God lives in the water tower.
What?
Yeah, it's just like crazy. It's like the craziest. I'm so grateful for these stories, and being able to, realize my own legacy. So these men came. He of course didn't want to go, and of course it's super faux pas to break families up.
Yeah.
You stay with family, but my grandma knew that it was the only opportunity he would have for anyone in the family to have some sort of education, to get off the reserve. He didn't really belong because he was like also we talked about like that imposter syndrome, but not so much for him. He just he wasn't fully native. He had a biologically white grandfather, and then he had a indigenous mom, biological mom. And so he was a half and half that really got racism on both ends of the spectrum wherever he went. So she wanted him to have a chance, and this was really hard for him. And he remembers her crying at the train station because he didn't, and she hid herself. She was a very quiet woman, but she was very strong, and didn't want him to see her cry. But he did it because for her, and I think he was 12 or 13, and he took a train and he got to Cardston, Alberta, which is kind of like the Mecca and Zion for Canada, where one of the first temples was built. And a family came and picked him up. And I think they were a member of the stake presidency. And they were terribly racist to him. I know. They were terribly racist to him. I mean, he hated his first year, but he was learning and he was speaking English. And he went home that summer on this long train ride. He begged her not to go back. And she said, no, you got to go back.
Yeah.
Did it all again. She was heartbroken. And when he went to the train station, I think the same family was supposed to pick him up, and they didn't. He was just left there. They were just gone. And there was another, I think Roland, I think was his name, about the same age as him, another placement program Indigenous boy was right next to him. And he was like, my family didn't pick me up. And he's like, well, maybe my family will want you. He's like, okay. Like
what else am I going to do?
This is like a 2-week train, like it might have been, maybe it's a week and a half, because it was from, British Columbia, northern coast of British Columbia, all the way to southern Alberta.
Oh my gosh.
And if you look on a map, anyone who has a little bit of geography, it's a long way to go. He is completely stranded. So who showed up was this little 14-year-old white boy. And, they didn't have licenses back then. He had a farm truck, and he showed up, and he's like, yeah, maybe my family will want you. Come on home with me. And they did.
Oh, that makes me happy.
And that became my foster grandparents and his foster parents, Frank and Haisla Nish. And they were so good to him. They were members of the church. They gave him a horse. They gave him responsibilities on the farm. They loved him like their own. And they took in, they had their own kids, and they just made it work. And so he'll always be indebted to them for the education he got, and he was able to learn English, and he did really well in high school. Actually, he was quite handsome dude and very charismatic, and the ladies loved him. And that's while he was in southern Alberta. My mother lived in Tabor, which is a hop, skip, and a jump. Oh, I want to say an hour and 45 minutes from Cardston. Oh, hour and a half from Cardston. Small towns, right? Like all these small towns. And my mom wasn't a member. And I think she was 21 when she converted. My mother, her grandfather is from Hungary, and my grandmother is from England, and they met in World War II in Great Britain. I want to say a dance or something, like swing dance or something. And that's how they met. And they eventually came over to Canada as first generation immigrants. And that's my mother's history. And there's a lot of history. And that's why I'm so tall, is because I get that from him. And so there's a lot of amazing, rich history in my family, even though I'm like this mutt. So she was in Tabor. That's where they kind of settled. And I think eventually made her way up to Edmonton or Calgary. I can't remember. Mother, forgive me. And was going through a hard time of her own, and was always looking for God, always had questions, didn't quite fit in the church that she was going to. They kind of made it seem like God was like this this spirit that would permeate through you and me and didn't really have a physical body.
Mm-hmm.
And she would ask, like, then why do we have a picture of him?
Yeah.
Why does he look like us? And they said, well, it's just so you have an idea of him. And that never settled well with her. So it wasn't necessarily, she told me, it wasn't like Joseph Smith converted me to the gospel. It was the idea that Heavenly Father and Jesus Christ had this physical body and were just like us.
Yeah.
And we're human. And she's like, that was like one of the first things. And then of course she read the Book of Mormon and all that stuff followed. So she, as a 21-year-old, converted. And then down in Cardston, where my dad is at, he was a couple years younger. I want to say he was 19. They have this resort. If you've ever been to Waterton, it's the Canadian portion of Glacier National Park. It's phenomenal. It's beautiful. You have to go. It's not as near as big as the Montana side, but it's amazing. And he worked, and they both ended up working randomly at this place called the Prince of Wales Hotel, where people like wear kilts, and it's like this kind of...
Oh, really?
Yeah. It's
That's
like
awesome.
really old, and it was fancy back in the day. It's, not as high quality now, but it's still really neat and cool to go to. And my mom was a maid, and my father was a cook. And my father said he remembered seeing my mom's legs. And and so they started hanging out, and they started going on dates, and that was kind of it. And so they ended up marrying after they had both converted. And so at that point, they decided to go down to BYU for furthering their education. I think they were in Calgary for a bit. There's timeline in there I'm not 100% certain of, but they had 4 kids. My mom was told she couldn't have any children. And so they adopted my brother, who was actually blood and Blackfoot. And obviously were able to get their foot in the door because of my father, who was Indigenous. And then my mother didn't get pregnant until she was almost 30. And then she had 3.
Wow.
It was my brother first, and then me, and then my sister. So there was 4 of us kids for a while. And then my dad, we eventually moved back to Kitamaat, back to the Northwest Coast, close to the reservation. I lived there, like I said, till I was 2 years old, but it wasn't, my brothers remember it. I don't. It just wasn't the best environment on the res. And so my mom said, hey, let's just move 15 minutes into the white part of town, essentially, white Kitamaat. But we would go there often.
And family, yeah.
And they're all family. All my cousins, all my aunties, like love them. Big part of our lives. And and so we moved into the I wanted to mention, though, the crazy thing about this, I think it was till the 60s or the 70s that a paved road wasn't actually made into the village.
Interesting.
So people had to canoe. Yeah.
Really?
Yes. Or by boat. You had to travel. That's how you got to the village. So it was pretty isolated.
Yeah.
So when we moved into that's where I'm picking up now. We moved into Kitamaat, and that's where I remembered playing in our backyard and going to the beach a lot and going to the village a lot. And my parents were still members, and my dad became the bishop of our branch.
Yeah.
The branch president. Very small branch. We were the primary, maybe 1 or 2 other families, and that was it.
Yeah.
Very small. And my father struggled. I don't know how much I want to say of that.
Yeah.
But there was a lot of struggle in the family, and for 18 years, on and off, there was struggle. And eventually, he wanted nothing to do with the church. And the crazy thing is that he was the leader of our church and our branch, and just an incredible, my father has always been such a giving, serviceable man. That's never changed with him. Very charismatic. A lot of people loved him, followed him. And just he had Hugh Nibley, I think, at BYU mentor him. So he still has some of those books, which is crazy. But he baptized me 2 months before leaving the church.
Oh, wow.
So I have a picture of us. And my mom said that he had a hard time, we had to do the baptism over and over again a few times.
Yeah.
And she wasn't sure why, but she thought it might have to do with the fact that he was phasing out from his belief with Christ, unfortunately. So all of us were born and raised in the gospel, us 4 siblings. But at 8 years old is when my parents separated and got a divorce. Mm-hmm. And so then all of a sudden we had these 2 like bipolar beliefs.
Yeah.
We had one that was against and one that was completely for. And in their extremes, and us as children trying to please both parents that we loved very much, we all kind of went through our own hard stuff. I had a period of inactivity myself after high school, and we all had to kind of figure out our own belief system and where we belonged and where we felt comfortable. And right now I'm the only member of the siblings. My mom is still in the church, and myself and my stepfather. So both my parents remarried. They're still, all my family's still in Canada. I'm the only one down here in the US. But I guess what I was trying to tell you before we started this interview was that you can look at that as like a sad story, or you can look at that as like, how lucky am I that I had every comfort of the gospel given to me in order to know Christ and to find him in my life. I'm so blessed.
Yeah.
I'm very blessed. And my parents are awesome, and they're so supportive, all of them. Very lucky to have, 6 parents now, because I'm married. A lot of grandparent love for my 4-year-old. Yeah. So, and another thing I want to say too is I think it's really easy, especially in any culture where family is, especially in our culture, in our heritage, where we have a lot of, abuse and dysfunction, and that happens not within just our immediate family, but with our extended family. Like there's a lot of hard things that people that live on the res have to deal with in families and in groups. A lot of beautiful things too that you don't get in the white culture, which we can get into later. But I want to say that something I learned that's really helped me was that like our parents are really doing the best they can, and that if they give us less trauma than they've been given,
that's a win.
That's a win. Is that not a win?
That is.
And then we're doing the same thing. I know I'm going to give my daughter some trauma, but I hope it's less than what I've been given. And it's a win for all of us. And so I thank I honor all my parents for that, because it wasn't easy for my mom. It wasn't easy for my dad. His story is crazy. And he had a really, really hard time as a child with abuse. And I don't want to get into it, but yeah, he's come out on the other end too. So we just had to navigate the waters, and it was tough for me for a long time to please both sides of the spectrum and to find out what my own testimony was without relying on anyone else's belief system.
Yeah, I'm sure that was hard.
Mm-hmm.
You said your grandma was the one that had that vision, that dream. Did anybody else of her family, like aunts and uncles, anybody else join the church?
No.
Just your dad?
There was a couple other members of our tribe that did, but more distantly from different families. Some stayed, some fell away, but not really. No, she was just a spiritual woman. Her favorite song was The Old Rugged Cross. And it's this interesting dichotomy of a woman on the brink of time where she has this old heritage that she's still practicing, and this new religion that was given, I think it was Catholic or Lutheran, that was given to them that they loved. And a lot of them were part of the choirs and lived to sing and lived to serve and went to church on Sunday, even though some of these leaders were the same people that were, doing them harm. It's really interesting, but they found, in my opinion, she found God in her own way.
Yeah.
Through her, like whatever spiritual beliefs that were handed to her, she found an interesting mix of both sides of the truth. And I know that she believed in God.
Well, that's what you and I were talking about earlier. And a lot of what I want this podcast to be is that we can recognize that there is truth in the indigenous way, religions and ceremonies and things, but it also testifies of the truthfulness of what we understand as the gospel of Jesus Christ.
Yes. Yeah. The fullness of the gospel of Jesus Christ. I agree. Yeah. And I think that, and I don't know if I said this with you already, but maybe it was beforehand we started talking, which was you can find truths everywhere you go that are beautiful and God approves of them. We have the fullness, and we're so grateful for that, good, better, best. But you appreciate and you respect the differences and the similarities in all cultures. And that's something that as we are divided and we're fearful as, citizens and country and cultures and different sects of people, I just feel like instead of like focusing on our differences, we really need to focus on the similarities and celebrate them.
Yeah, I agree. So how did you end up in Utah?
So, yeah, I was inactive, like I said, for a while after high school, which was weird. I was seminary president in high school. I really was trying to do everything I could to be perfect in junior high school. And I always had a testimony of God. I never stopped believing in that. But I was kind of floundering after high school in college, and I went to an art school, which I loved. It was my first degree in theater performance, acting, singing, dancing. It was great. But then I had this whole plan. I was going to stay in Calgary, and I had this full ride scholarship, and my boyfriend was there, and my girlfriend came to me, who was kind of going through, a spiritual awakening of her own. And she was like, "Hey, I'm going to go to BYU, Idaho, down in Rexburg. Do you want to come?" Like, no.
You're like, bah!
Yeah, no, I laughed. I was like, I don't know. She's like, "I really think you need to think about it." I was like, okay. Literally a week and a half till the deadline to submit. I was like, all right. So for the first time in my life, I really prayed and fasted. I made a pros and cons list. I talked to my mom about it. And all the pros were aiming towards staying in Calgary. Like, logically, stay here. You have a scholarship. It's all going to work out. But I just felt a drive towards BYU, Idaho. And I felt like there was a lot of rules that I wasn't used to. Clothing rules and housing rules, like curfew rules, all the things that I know people would scoff at now. They don't have RAs anymore, which are the people that check on you at night. It was kind of ridiculous, but I will say I needed it in my life. I needed that. And I didn't have a fully developed testimony for myself. And so I said yes. I got my submission in. Somehow they said yes. Played my Canadian Indigenous minority card fiddle and got into BYU last minute, BYU Idaho, and went down there, and it was fabulous. It was awesome. And I remember just sitting, we had to take religion classes, and I remember sitting in the hallway, of my dorm, which was me and 5 other girls packed into this, tiny apartment. And I remember sitting on the floor reading the Book of Mormon, being like, this is true. This, like, it really just solidified for me the beliefs that I had been taught my whole life. I knew God was real. I knew Jesus was real. But at that point, I was like, this is real. And it developed into a big testimony builder for me to be there at that school, to have, make more mistakes, of course, like we do as young college students. But all that experience was for my good. And so that's how I got into the States. And I met my first husband, actually. And so, which is another story, but we were married for 4.5 years. He was a good man. He's from Wyoming. He's a cowboy, horse whisperer. So people called us cowboy and Indian for a while. It's just funny, but not funny to some. You don't have a sense of humor. And, it didn't work out. There was demons that he was struggling with. And that's how I got sponsored, though, to be in the U.S. and how I stayed. And I felt like I needed to stay. I was in Canada on and off after our divorce. But we never had any kids. And eventually I made my way back down. It's interesting. I went through a lot after that too. And I found myself as a 30-year-old woman after I just moved back from LA with nothing in my pocket. And I knew it wasn't the right place for me. God had kind of said, you shouldn't be here. I was there. This is just not the right time. Felt like I would die alone if I stayed in LA trying to pursue my dreams as an actor and a model and all that stuff. And I wasn't there for very long, and it didn't take long for God to just be like, no. And so I went back home.
You had your chance, and I'm telling you otherwise.
Yeah. We'll come back. I felt like I wouldn't have a family if I stayed there. I felt like I would die alone in a casket with an Oscar in my hands. But what does that mean? Or I could have kids and I could have a family and then revisit this secondary dream later. that I had, because that wasn't the most important thing in this life, is what I was realizing, And so I went back to my parents' house, Terry and Fairsaug in Tabor, Alberta, as a 30-year-old woman, completely broke, not single, divorced. What do I do? And my mom helped me. And she said, hey, what if you window wash? Which it's totally humbling, but it was so great for me. And I window washed all of her friends' windows in our small town. And people knew that I was trying to raise money to pay my parents back and to develop and start anew. And after that, I just felt like I needed to give back. And I actually decided to go back to Utah. I felt like that's where the scene was in terms of like a young single adult. And there was also, made hardly any money, but I was a wilderness guide for Aspiro, which is kind of dysfunctional youth that go there as a camp. And we help guide them through the wilderness and kind of this, what do you call it? Intervention almost in the wilderness. So I did that for a bit, and that's how I ended up staying in Utah, eventually meeting my second husband. And we got married, and we have a child, and she's 4 years old, and she's beautiful. And she just got her First Nations, or her Indigenous name actually, a month ago.
That's so cool.
Yeah, her name's Lala Guade, or Tlitsumesus Lala Guade will be her adult name, which means sun shining on a butterfly. But for now, it's Butterfly, Lala Guade.
Oh my gosh, that's so
It's so cute. They told us because, yes, butterflies are beautiful and she's beautiful, but they're also strong and they travel long distances like the monarch butterfly. So, and I don't know about the Navajo culture, but butterflies are very sacred to us and the Northwest Coast, and they're messengers.
That's awesome.
So
you're a multi-functioning, multi-faceted artist. Tell us some about your art that you do, like all the different things.
I'm just starting to say, I think I'm an artist in life, because I grew up in a small town like you did, and I played volleyball and basketball and badminton, and I was like kind of tomboyish, and but then in my last year of senior high school, they needed someone by default to join a theater show. My sister was like, they need someone. We don't have anyone. No one wants to do this. I was like, okay, cool. And I remember forgetting my lines on stage.
Oh, no.
And just making it up.
Sure.
And I left being like, I just ruined this whole scene.
Oh, no.
And the director at the time was like, that's amazing. They're laughing. You saved it. And I got the bug. I was like, this is what I can be, whoever I want on stage. This is very therapeutic for me.
Applaud for me.
Yeah, I was like, okay, well, I messed up, but it wasn't really messed up. So I could make mistakes in that as a creator. It was like yes to everything, right? And so I went to art school. I went down to BYU and became I got my degree in theater, speech, and music as a teacher, grades 6 through 12. Although I did a student teaching, but I moved too much to stay in one state too long to start teaching. And then I did event coordinating and I did other jobs to get by, but I eventually got an agent and started doing acting and modeling. They got me into modeling because they're like, oh, you're tall, let's get you into modeling, which was kind of a veer off course for a while. I loved fashion and the creativeness of it, but it was really, really even much harsher than the acting world. It's industry of rejection, but just like you have to have really, really thick skin and really know your limits and your boundaries in terms of like morality in that industry. So that didn't last too long, but I dabbled in it, and I always have been a musician, and I loved writing music, and considered myself just an amateur. I had a guitar. I self-taught. I learned to play the piano. I had a trumpet, for a while. And so I loved music. Music was always in my family. So there was that side of musicianship. I had the acting side that was, through indie projects and commercials, short films and long narrative films. And then as we moved to North Carolina for 4 years because my husband's military training, and I had 3 knee surgeries in a row. And so it kind of was like, I couldn't do anything.
You're kidding me.
Yeah. Like I have my yoga instructing out there, and I couldn't even do that. Like there was nothing I could do. And so it kind of backed me in the corner in the best way possible to start writing. And I joined an Indigenous female writing program that I got into last minute, thanks to my stepmother who sent me this ad for it. And I learned how to really write for film at that point. And they gave us a program and they kind of mentored us. And then that's when they were like, well, what do you want to write about? And I was like, I don't know. I guess I got to write a short film of some sorts. And I've been in lots of films, but I've never written for stage, but never film. And I was in a rush for the application process to tell them what I was going to write about before they accepted me. And I went to my journal because I was like, I don't know what to do. I have like till midnight to submit this. It was like this is my life. It's always last minute, right? I'm ADHD. And so it's just like I thrive by that or something. And anyways, so I went to my journal, and about 6 years ago, I'd had this really like personal dream that I hadn't told a lot of people about. And it was really the only time in my life this has ever really happened where I knew God was like speaking directly to me through this story, but through metaphoric symbols in the dream. And anyways, long story short, I took that dream and I just said, and in the journal entry, it says, at one day, maybe I'll be talking to people about this dream, but I don't know when, which gave me chills when I read that part because I forgot that I'd written that. So fast forward 6 years later, I submitted this dream as like the basis and the bones for the story plot line that I wanted to write about. And then as I got mentored through the program, this specific film and this story, they chose to, out of the group of us, had read out loud by live actors at the Vancouver Women in Film Festival. And then from there, I was like, well, if it's good enough to be there, why don't I just start running the film circuit? And so I talked to a friend. He kind of told me the ropes, and I just did a little spreadsheet. And all this past year have been collecting and receiving rejections and awards from film festivals.
Wow.
All over. And it's been such an honor. And most recently, I went to the Austin Film Festival as one of 3 finalists. I was in a room with Oscar winners, and I was like, how did this happen?
Goodness.
No, it's just crazy. From, when you have crazy stuff hit you, trials hit you, where you're like, this life is terrible. I was in bed for 4 months, on crutches for 6+ months. Things were hard in the military, really hard. I just had my baby. I was going through an identity crisis and body dysmorphia.
Yeah.
There was all these things happening. And I always think that that's like the best time to have you exponentially grow and progress in life, and that God's really going to work with you. And the best, and that in that time, just really efficiently. And so I tried my best to grab the bull by the horns and be like, hey, what blessings, what silver lining is coming from this, and how can I move forward with it? And so that was the writing that had happened. And so now that's happening. That snowballed into my brother from his company, Gilwa, which is essentially he's a liaison between and a consultant between the culture of like white corporate America and First Nation and Indigenous culture, helping them come together on business contracts for like land and pipeline or construction, whatever it might be, industry, because they don't know how to deal with each other. And so he's been, that person, and he's has his own business now to develop contracts with them and make a win-win for everyone. And so that's what he does. But he really wanted to write a children's book.
Oh, yeah.
They're to
totally
kind of like
related.
No, not I know it's so random, but he was like, no, I really do. I think we could use the graphic artist we've already used for my business cards and make something, and I can maybe use this as a marketing tool, because my whole business model is surrounded by like the seasonal changes of the Ulukan or the Jakwin, which is the candlefish that we have. And so his whole business model and how he explains himself is through this. And so he's like, how can we incorporate this into a kid's book so I can use it as a marketing tool to maybe give to CEOs, or maybe we could like, anyways, he came to me after he had heard about my film, and he was like, do you want to write a kid's book? I was like, yes. So that happened this last year. And we've got a finished product that we're really proud of. I can't say too much about it, unfortunately, yet, but we're starting to pitch to publishers. And we've already had really good feedback from publishers that want to meet with us and sign with us. And I hope it's only a matter of time. Publishing worlds take a while, but I'm hoping in the next 2 years we're collecting some royalties and I can hand you a book, a children's book with Indigenous artwork.
I love that for you. I'm so happy for you.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm really happy too. It just seems like it took me a long time to get here. I feel like a late bloomer in a lot of ways, and there was a lot of struggle and a lot of trial. But like I told you earlier, my mom says, age 40, age of enlightenment, Shiloh, things are going to come together for you. And I turned 40 in February. So I consider it all a sign. It's all coming together.
Yeah. Well, the way you just described it, it's like there's no straight line from where you started to where you are right now. It's like a knot. Like if you followed it, it's up and down and back and forth.
All connected. It's all connected. And you don't know, I don't know all the reasons why. You know, we can say things in hindsight. When we're in the thick of things, we're just like, why? Why God? And you pray really hard to understand why. But I don't even know if he knows all the reasons why sometimes, but it's all for our good. You have to look at, and it was a quote that I read the other day that was by this woman in the early 1900s, and she was basically saying that mortal life is just an in-between.
Yeah, it is.
If we keep having faith in the pre-existence and the post-mortal world, and celestial world, and you know, this world receiving its paradisical glory and Christ coming back, like, it is such an expansive amount of time we can't comprehend. Who we were before we came here, the purpose of us being here, it's really just to help us grow. And we signed up for this. We forget that. Like, I was up in heaven being like, oh no, we got to do this. This is the only way we can become like our Heavenly Father. We didn't know what, we didn't know how. And so when we're in the thick of things and we're feeling sorry for ourselves and being like, oh, this is not what I wanted life to hand me.
Yeah.
We just got to go, yeah, but this was the whole point. This was the whole point, is to prove yourself herewith. So
a thought that just came to mind, and I've had little bits and pieces of this thought recently, but a lot of Indigenous people call our Father in heaven the creator, right? And you are a creator. And if you look back at this past October General Conference, there's actually quite a few times when the speakers refer to Heavenly Father as our creator.
Oh, yes, that's true.
More than I've ever noticed before.
That's true.
And I don't know if they did that on purpose, but I've caught it, and I should go back and look how many times they call him that in this past General Conference. But that is what he wants us to become, is a creator, and we practice here on this earth as creators right now, and he wants us to become creators of our own families and worlds someday.
Thank you for sharing that. I really just got chills with the spirit, whatever you want to call it, when you said that, because it's not just the blatant artistry of whatever I'm doing, you know, writing, music, acting. That's one form of artistry, but you're a mom. You have 4 children.
That thought came to me last night when I was thinking about the creator. I was like, I create an atmosphere.
The environment. Your husband's creating things. He's got skills. Everyone has skills and a pitch to play in the choir that no one else can fulfill. Yeah. And it's their own creation. And I think they had just come out with this new, I can't remember. I'm going to butcher this, but was it Uchtdorf or another apostle that was talking about the art? And they're promoting a lot of the art from around the world now, and artist interpretation of like different scriptures, stories, and in their own medium. And they're just so beautiful. And he was talking about that creating is a divine gift and that we need to practice it in whatever capacity we have.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. And I've been taught that from now and then, but sometimes it's nice to be like, oh, I see how all of these things, these thoughts come together to create meaning, purpose.
Yeah. Well, yeah, because we think of it so like we're mortal and we think of creating like, oh, I made this craft. No, but we're creating thoughts and we're creating intuition. There's so many things that we create.
Creating habits.
Growth.
Creating skills. Creating
learning,
talents.
Education. All of that is part of the growth and the progression. I totally agree. I think that's such a fabulous.
You have just... through this whole conversation, you've talked about so many different ways of you creating, and I love that about you. Oh. I think Heavenly Father is so pleased with the different ways you are creating in this world right now.
Thank you, Andrea. And I know he's pleased with you too. I know that he couldn't do it without either of us.
Yeah, it's true.
Yeah, there's no one else like you. There's no one else like me, and we all have a role. Mm-hmm. It's true. I guess I just want to say that I'm really grateful. I'm grateful to my family, and I'm grateful to my Father in heaven for making the special arrangements he did so that I could have the comforts I have, not just of the gospel, but, you know, look how cold it is outside. I'm so grateful I'm not a pioneer.
I know, right?
I'm just like, oh, yay. And you know what? It's funny because I don't know what part I took in, if I helped at all, you know, with Michael helping create the world. But sometimes I think maybe I just made some rocks, but maybe we needed those rocks. Anyways.
I have one final question for you. What does it mean to you to know that you belong to the tribe of Israel?
I thought about this question. That's a deep question, because we're part of a greater whole, and it kind of molds into the idea of identity that we were just talking about. It's everything, because it basically just says who we are, that we're children of God, that we believe in the plan of salvation, that we believe in the plan of happiness and what going through this hard things will bring us, what true joy really is. And that we're a tribe, and we have a leader of perfect example of our Savior Jesus Christ. We don't have a better leader than we do in this gospel. And he lived the mortal life, and he went through all that we did, even though he didn't necessarily need to. So he could be an example and show us the way. And most importantly, give us a way back. So being a part of the tribe of Israel is everything to me. Yeah, I'm so looking forward to the day that I get to hug him. You know what I mean? I know that sounds really dramatic, but I think there's a lot of us in our low points or maybe our really high points that we're like, man, that's going to be so cool. That's going to be really neat when he's just going to give us a big hug, or Heavenly Father's going to be there, or all of our ancestors that have been watching and the angels that have been helping us on the other side are just going to welcome us with open arms and be like, you did it. Yeah. And we're a tribe.
Yeah.
And we're a tribe. So, yeah, I just think just remembering who we are in this great plan will give us the eternal perspective to live happily in the present and not fear the future or regret the past.
Thank you. Thank you so much for coming here and being with me, Shiloh.
I'm so glad we're friends now, Andrea.
Yeah, me too. I am too.
I hope that, this isn't the last time we get to see each other.
Yeah, it won't be. We'll do something. Today we put away our Christmas decorations, and we have a lot. We have over 130 Christmas trees. That's because we're crazy. But we also have, I think it's 26 nativities. I think that's the number that we have. Anyway, I always try to leave one out every year through the whole year. And so I picked one to leave out this year. And I like how through most of December we talked about Jesus's birth in different ways, and we sang about him. And then this year, already this first week of January 2023, we still get to talk about him. I just wanted to bear my testimony that I am so grateful to know that Jesus did come and he did all that was asked of him. It makes all the difference to me. It makes all the difference because without that, all would be lost. There would be no reason. There would be no purpose, no future, no real future. So I'm so grateful to know that he did come and that Mary and Joseph were so good and raised him, and that we have scriptures that teach us what he did while he was here on the earth. And we have scriptures that talk to us about what he did before he came and what he has done since he came. I'm just so grateful for that. And that's something that I'm going to try to even improve on my testimony of him in this 2023 year. And I hope that you're having a super wonderful, awesome day. Tribe of Testimonies is not sponsored by the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. The music is a traditional hymn, Come Thou Fount of Every Blessing, arranged and performed by Kyle Forsyth. I would love to hear from you. I would love to hear how this podcast is affecting you. And I'm always looking for guests. If you or someone you know would be a great guest, you can reach me at tribeoftestimonies@gmail.com.